Hey, it's been a minute. Let me start off with this. I had a great reading month. Now, did I read all the books of like my minimum for October? No, not at all. But the books that I did read, I really enjoyed, and I think except for the one I DNF'd, I gave them all 3-4 stars. Some were like borderline 5. I may have given 1 5. And so let me get into what I read this month, and maybe if you find these interesting, I would highly encourage you to read them as well, pending one. And then if you want to read things for spooky season next year, these are for the most part really good for that too. Let me start off with my ambitions, okay? These are my ambitions. This is what I tried to do. I wanted to set this goal, 13 books that I wanted to read. But I was like, realistically, with the semester getting a little bit more stressful and a lot of stuff, going on, I narrowed it down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I read 4, and you may be like, oh wow, you read almost all of them. Only 2 of those of the 4 that I read were of like my 5 priority. So these are ones I didn't get to, or I started and didn't finish yet, but I plan on coming back to or completing before the year ends. It's a combination of some. That is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. That book is actually holding up the camera. Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. Life Expectancy by Dean Koontz, and that was a reread. It's one of my favorite books, but I haven't read it in years, and I'm like hesitant to say it's my favorite because it's one of my favorites, because you reread something and be like, wow, how could I have ever read that? Like, that's super like boring or stupid or predictable or problematic. So I'm a different person, so I really want to reread it. Got a spooky vibe. Labyrinth Lost by Zoraida Cordova as a series. I found a book and I was like, this book looks so cool. And then it was the second one of like a trilogy or 4 plus. And I was like, well, I can't start here. So I added the first one. Billy the Kid and the Vampires of Vegas, The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I wanted to read something like classic literature ish. And then there was The Haunting of Nellie Bly, I think is the name of the Netflix show. And I was like, maybe I could watch it if I read this book. But I didn't get to it. The premise is really interesting. I read the synopsis on the back like 3 times. The Lottery and Other Stories by Shirley Jackson, or at least the specific story, The Possibility of Evil, which I bought a giant compendium, I think, of Shirley Jackson's horror stories. So it had like the one about the glass castle, it had The Lottery and a bunch of short stories, and it had The House of Haunting Hill, I believe it's called. But I really didn't intend on reading all her books in October, all her short stories, or majority of them. I wanted to read this one, and of course, the book I bought did not have it, so I didn't get to that. And then, 2 more. Mob Psycho, which is a manga. I never read one before, and I was like, let's do it for Halloween. Also, there's a tweet. Outgoing President Trump's son, Eric Trump, not Donald Trump Jr., like I said the first time, talking about like sharing screenshots of when you put mob into Google, and how on Google it will show this manga, which I already knew about, and then if you do it on Bing, it shows like people like a mob like rioting. And so he was like, the left-wing agenda, and I'm just like, this is just an anime, sir. But whatever. The last book that I didn't get to that I wanted to read, I actually started, I'm like about 20% through the book, is Ring Shout by Mr. Clark. That's what I'm going to call him, because I do not want to mispronounce his name. And I was super excited to read it. The book came out in the middle of the month, so it would just have to line up right, and it didn't. So of those, the ones that I really wanted to get to were The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, The Lottery and Other Stories, specifically The Possibility of Evil short story by Shirley Jackson, and Mob Psycho 100. I don't think I said the word 100 before. Here, well, I've been showing you the pictures, so you might have seen that, and I said it wrong. Those are the three I really wanted to get to that I didn't, but I'm still happy with what I read, which we're 7 minutes in. I'm going to edit this down. We're 30 seconds in, we're something in, and I still haven't gotten to that, so let's get into that. The first thing that I read this month was Fledgling by Octavia Butler. This is my first Octavia Butler anything, and I freaking loved it. I know like the premise of quite a few of her books, but this one I didn't. All I knew was like vampires. That's it. And I respect what she did, like her craft, without actually reading it. The contribution she's given to the sci-fi genre, people call her the person who invented Afrofuturism, even though she didn't like that term. That was a term bestowed onto her. So I just really been wanting to read one of her books, and so that one being vampires and like monsters, perfect for Halloween. I use monster very like I guess loosely, like traditional monster, even though it did a lot of these books push back and examine that word. So just going forward, keep that in mind. Yes, I got that one 5 out of 5 stars. I will be purchasing it. I actually thought I owned it, but I owned a different book that is not Halloweenish enough to have read in October. So, Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. I mean, who am I? Like, if you haven't read her yet, you're in my boat, and now I'm out of that boat, and you too need to be. I really want to read Kindred, and Parable of the Sower, I think is what it's called. Because one, I know the premise of one of them, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's intense. And then the other element of why I want to read it, I believe it's Kindred, is because it's also a graphic novel and has a movie. So I want to read the book so I can experience all the other mediums and see how they're going to be referenced in film, going forward. As we've seen, like, more people of color be able to write and star and direct in more sci-fi fantasy, I feel like her work, from what I understand, is right for the adapting or the referencing. So I want to understand those references. The next book I read was Undead Girl Gang by Lily Anderson. Before I start about like the actual book, Lily Anderson was one of the few that I like. When I wrote this list of books I'd like to read and books I'm prioritizing, I really wanted to make sure I was reading Latinx authors, because one, I need to read more in general of that type of storyteller, and two is because the middle of September to the middle of October is Hispanic Heritage Month in the U.S. So like anytime there's these cultural months, like I try to read people all year long, right, and make sure my reading is diverse, but I really like I try and prioritize it when I like really do it during those times, because I have all these things like on my mind, and my attention's everywhere, and so it's a good way to like focus for a second. And Lily Anderson was one of those. Undead Girl Gang, it was a little slow in the beginning for me, but basically I didn't even tell you what the other one was about. Oof. It's okay. Just read it. That's what I'll tell you though. Is about this character. Her best friend recently passed under mysterious circumstances, so she's like, no, I do not accept that, which is completely understandable in the grieving process. But what's not understandable is that she brought her back using magic. She didn't think it would work to begin with, but it did. And so when I say it did, like it did what she wanted, but then gave her some more stuff that she wasn't anticipating, as magic does. And so her friend and the stuff that happens, the others involved, are on a race to figure out who possibly killed her friend, who possibly killed other people, because there's a string of murders. And I think they have like about a week to do it because the bodies are deteriorating. So zombie films, except for like very few, most of the time zombies are just something that you try and avoid being, but they don't have any humanity to them, because just the way that zombies are shown in TV, the only humanity is usually someone trying to grasp onto it as it's like gone. So you think of The Walking Dead, Train to Busan, all this, right? Whereas this and a few other select stories. And realizing I said Halloween Town when I met Hocus Pocus. Hocus Pocus is able to show the zombie character in a very empathetic way and really humanizes him and I really value that. And so Lily Anderson does that here, and it's a very cute story. The main character is a bitch, and I felt bad. She would say like really mean things, and I would like actually laugh when I was listening to the audiobook and be like, wow, that's really harsh. Some of it is problematic stuff, but most of it is just like, you can be like mean and not be saying something problematic. Like being mean by itself is enough, right? So very complex characters and a good twist and just a good story. I rated it 4 to 5 stars. I might reread it one day and I definitely probably intend on picking it up in a physical copy. All of these I checked out from the library, so I don't own any of the ones that I actually finished. But I intend, especially 3 of them, the Fledgling by Octavia Butler and this by Lily Anderson, Undead Girl Gang, I intend on purchasing in the future. The next book, which was a did not finish, a DNF, The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. So I should have known going in that I was going to have problems with this. Basically, the main reason I wasn't able to finish it was that, like, it was kind of boring to me. Like, it was written very well and very descriptive and very, like, mysterious, but also I didn't know what was going on with the plot. I don't know if it's because it's embedded in pop culture to a way that, like, nothing surprised me. Like, at that time, the stuff that H.G. Wells wrote was like, oh no, like, people freaked out about it. Look up the story of how World of Worlds, whenever it did the radio broadcast, I'm almost positive that's the same H.G. Wells, the way that affected communities, and then a lot of his other stories too, like, they resonate. But this one just did not hit, so I did not finish. I did want to put it on this list, though, because I got, like, if I get, like, more than 33% in, I'll finish it. I'm probably going to bring it up unless I have a lot of books to talk about. But this one, I only have 4 that I finished, so here we go. I think I gave it a 2-star. DNF'd at 58% through, could not get into it. Okay, so the next one on my list is The Lady from the Black Lagoon, Hollywood Monsters and the Lost Legacy of Millicent Patrick. Now, this book, I'm gonna say right now, on the onset, disappointed me. Like, I still gave it 4 stars, but I misunderstood who Millicent was. Number one, I thought she was a black woman, so I was like, you know, get it, especially for all the feats that she overcame at the time period. And she wasn't. She was just a spicy white person. She was Italian, like ethnic white. So that was kind of disappointing when I figured out she wasn't black. But she was still, like, regardless, like, I'm not gonna not like her because she's not black. She's an extraordinary person, and a person, like, I recommend everybody read this book. But that's where my headspace was about 15% into the book, and I was like, well, shit. But it tells a story of, oh, by the way, this book is by Mallory O'Meary, I believe is how you pronounce her name. This book is about, like it says, Millicent Patrick. She goes by a bunch of names, but the author kind of had to establish a name that she was going to reference her as. Were made up names. Some of them were nicknames. She was not married a few times, so that's what I'm also going to call her. The book was like 40% about Millicent and about the creature from the Black Lagoon, which is how this story even ever came about. She's like the only female, like, lead designer on a classic Universal monster, which is a really big deal. When I say classic Universal monster, I'm talking about the Mummy. I'm talking about basically all the monsters except the ones linked with Godzilla. Like, Godzilla and Mothra and stuff are separate, but these are things like the Frankenstein films, the Swamp Thing, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and some of these, yes, are adaptations, but so a lot of these adaptations took a lot of creative liberty, and so they kind of set the standard of what people think about when they think of, like, Frankenstein or Dracula, unless you've read the books, and even then, the visuals that those creatives, like, set were the standard. And, like, if anybody deviates from it, it's called a twist on that, not a twist on the original. That's usually the way people write and speak about new adaptations of stuff. So she created The Creature from Black Lagoon, the design for it. Very incredible life, very sad life in a lot of parts. But the book is about 40% about her and the creature. I would say 35-40% Hollywood history. So, and yeah, Hollywood history and everything linked to that. So Disney, what's that guy's name? William Randolph Hearst and his whole castle influence ordeal, writer strikes at a certain time, and then about 20-ish% is about the writer and about feminism and about women in film and stuff like that, and making these links about microaggressions in the way women are treated now in the film industry to the past, and how very little has changed, not just in the way that they're treated, but also the numbers of women that are behind the camera. Like in front of the camera is a different story, and then there's also like quality over quantity, the fact that so many on camera don't get names, don't do anything but to serve the purpose of the man. But behind camera, where these creative decisions are being made to begin with, the writers' room, the directors, the producers, down to the gaffers, and I think they're not called boomers. The guys that hold the boom, the men and women, the people. Anyways, all these, the riggers, the lighting, everything is mostly done through the perspective of a man. So, for Melissa Patrick, I keep want to call her Fitzpatrick, so it was one of her names, I think. Being able to rise and be a successful animator, successful costume designer, successful model, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, I think. Maybe just like 30s to the 50s, but still, is really incredible. And also women who tend to be like more conventionally attractive whenever they do anything, like women in general, but especially if you're seen as like pretty by society standards, if you do positions like this, people assume like, oh, you slept with somebody, or oh, you took credit for somebody else's work. And she also had to fight that too, because she was a very beautiful woman. So I could do a whole video about this book. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4 to 5 stars. I don't think I wrote why I gave it 4. I think I gave it 4 because there were expectations I have of the book that were very little. Like, I had very minimal expectations going in, and some of them were not met. But like, I don't think that's the fault to the author, but it still like affected the way I experienced the story. So I wasn't gonna give it 5 stars if those things bother me. And it wasn't just her race, there was some other stuff too. Like, I didn't expect so much of it to be about the author, and I appreciated those moments and those connections. But because I thought it was gonna be a different book, it always took me a second to adjust. To be like, wait, we talked about you for 45 minutes or whatever. We talked about the Me Too movement or whatever in the middle of the book instead of like the beginning of the end. And I had no issue with anything about the book except the way I interacted with it. And so I gave it 4 to 5 stars. I will be purchasing this book. I'm excited to see. I don't think she will, because if you read the story, you'll see why I don't think she will do any other writing, Mallory O'Meara, but she's more of like an advocate for making sure Millicent's story gets told. And so I'm excited to see what other ways that she can push this and gain awareness about Millicent. So I don't know if that's TV, a movie, a little documentary. Either way, she put her like heart and soul into making sure that this other woman, like creative voice, didn't get lost in history, because like as she said in the novel, so many people who are like hardcore monster horror like nerds and stuff, including herself, never heard of this woman. So she's focused on making sure that her legacy continues. And the final book that I read is Shadowshaper by Daniel Jose Older. So, and this is like also a series. This one I gave 3 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I liked a lot of elements of it, but I feel like, and even though I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, that doesn't mean it was bad. I think it was a good book. It's just, I feel like there was some things to be improved on, and some pacing issues, but I will be continuing the series, and I'm excited to see where it goes. From what I saw in the reviews, a lot of people like the second book, and I think it goes to a third better, so I am excited moving forward. And the reason, well, I already kind of saw this book, and I put it on, I didn't put it as a priority, but I put it as one that I did want to make sure I read a few Latinx authors, and so he was the second one I read this book this month, and completed. And when I was looking up stuff about him, was also when I was looking up stuff about Lovecraft, because I really like Lovecraft Country. The show, it's not perfect, I have a few major flaws, but it was very, very good and such an ambitious work. And so I wanted to learn more about Lovecraft, even though it's all sad and terrible. And this author's name came up because he was an advocate for getting some sci-fi awards names changed. Oh, I should follow him on Twitter. Lovecraft is such a, like, his work kind of goes beyond him. Like, people don't know necessarily that one guy created, like, the Cthulhu mythos and really made the occult horror kind of subgenre a big deal. But despite his name being removed from the work, his name has persisted through the work because the genre is called Lovecraftian. So, like, imagine if, magical school Harry Potter-ish thing, there's so many that come after it, if they were all called Rowling, even though they were a different author, or, like, Rowling aesthetic. So, the genre moved beyond him, but there was an award, the World Fantasy Award, a bust of him as the award, which is like you're giving it to people in the 20-teens of a, not even just kind of racist man, like incredibly racist even for his time, to like making him the symbol of an award, like if it was an Oscar, but for fantasy and fiction and horror writing, and how that's shouldn't be a thing. So Alder was actually one of the voices that pushed to get it changed. Let me see. He wanted to get it to be Octavia Butler, who wrote Fledgling, the first book that I read. That's just a coincidence. So the trophy now, I'm showing a picture of it, is what it is now. So it's not really a specific face, which is good. It's kind of removed from his legacy. But this symbol, and so I kind of had one of his books on my list, Shadowshaper, and I believe another one, and then after I read that, I was like, I'm gonna bump him to the top. Let's see what Shadowshaper is about. And Shadowshaper, which I haven't even said what it's been about. It's 20-something minutes in. So this book follows Sierra Santiago, who is working on this mural, and she finds out that her grandfather was a part of this group of people. It describes it as an order that could use music and art to connect with the spirits in some way, and that he shared it with this anthropologist, and she gets entangled in that. Okay, some of her family's like, your grandpa was crazy. Other people are like, no, don't even worry about it, whether it is or it isn't. You don't want to mess with that. Focus on your schoolwork. Don't look at boys, blah, 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 blah. And so, she gets tied up in that. And I don't really want to say too much more without spoiling it. Also, some parts of it were kind of spotty to me. And so I don't want to go into details of a mundane part, or a super important part. So we're just going to end it like that. The book is really good. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I intend on continuing the series, and some of his other work. I'm going to be a little bit more careful when I choose, though, because most of his work is, I shouldn't say most of his work, a lot of his work is aimed for, like, middle school, high school, and there were some parts, even in Shadowshaper, that were a little, like, heavy-handed for me as a 26, 27-year-old, so, I'm just going to be a little bit more selective, but I do want to continue the series and probably check out some more of his work. As like a person and as now his art, I really appreciate the work that he's been doing for inclusivity and making sure that Black and brown voices are not left behind in these like revolutionary genres of horror, fantasy, sci-fi. And I just respect it, and I like his writing. So those are the books I was able to get to. The ones that I started but I didn't finish this month were Ring Shout, Our Body and Other Parties. And for the month of November, I'm not really pressed on trying to set a goal. I might do a TBR wrap up. If I can get 4 books read this month, I'm going to count that as a win. I do have a lot of classwork to catch up on. If you like this video, please hit the like button. And when I say hit, I of course mean click or tap, depending on what device you're on. And subscribe to get more book and art-related content. I have so many ideas of stuff to do, but I keep getting hung up on completing something and saying like, that has to be finished. I can't upload any videos, and I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to try not to do that. Maybe if the masks that I'm wearing in public, as we all should be, stop making me break out so much, I can film more. We'll see. Thank you for watching. Bye. Hang on. I wanted to read. Oh, we good, lady?